Did you know that 95% of Australia is almost empty, with vast stretches of land where you might travel for days without seeing another person? When people imagine Australia, they often think of vibrant cities like Sydney, Melbourne, or Brisbane teeming with life and bustling with activity. But the reality is, beyond these coastal hubs lies a vast expanse of land that is remarkably empty. You might wonder why such a massive country, filled with such incredible natural beauty, remains so sparsely populated. What could be hiding in the heart of this mysterious land that keeps people away? Could it be the relentless heat that turns the ground to dust? Or perhaps it's the endless deserts that seem to swallow up everything in their path? Could it be that Australia's ancient, worn-down landscape offers little more than barren soil, unable to support life? And what about water? Why are the rivers dry, and where did people find enough to survive? How did history shape this empty land, and why did the first settlers choose to live so far from the interior? What secrets do the indigenous people hold about surviving in such a harsh environment? But that's not all. How do Australia's unique animals and plants play a part in this emptiness? Why do Australians prefer the coast, leaving the heart of the country so deserted? What's it like to live in such isolation, where the nearest neighbor could be hundreds of miles away? And finally, could it be that this emptiness is not just a result of nature, but a deliberate choice to keep Australia's wild beauty untouched? Let's embark on a journey to uncover these mysteries and explore the surprising reasons why 95% of Australia remains empty. First, imagine the searing heat of the outback. Did you know that Australia is one of the driest continents on Earth? The central regions of the country are dominated by vast deserts, where the sun blazes down mercilessly, turning the land into a barren, inhospitable wilderness. The temperatures can rise so high during the day that it feels like the ground itself is on fire, only to drop sharply at night, leaving the air cold and biting. In such an extreme environment, it's almost impossible to grow crops or sustain large communities. The scarcity of water makes survival a constant battle, pushing people to the cooler, wetter coastal areas where life is more manageable. But it's not just the heat. Did you know that Australia's landscape is one of the oldest on the planet? Over millions of years, the land has been eroded and worn down, leaving much of the interior flat and featureless. The soil here is ancient and depleted, lacking the nutrients needed to support plant life. Unlike the fertile plains of other continents, Australia's interior is covered in poor, dusty soil that can barely sustain a few hardy shrubs, let alone the crops needed to feed a population. This barren landscape is another reason why so few people choose to live here. And what about water? Did you know that Australia's rivers, especially in the interior, are often dry or reduced to mere trickles? The country's major river systems, like the Murray-Darling Basin, are concentrated in the southeast, far from the arid center. In the outback, water sources are scarce and unreliable. The rivers that do exist are often ephemeral, meaning they only flow during rare rainstorms before disappearing into the sand. With no consistent rivers or lakes, and groundwater often buried deep beneath the surface, finding enough water to survive in the interior is a constant struggle, driving people to the more reliable coastal regions. History adds another twist to this tale. Did you know that when European settlers arrived in Australia, they largely ignored the interior? The early settlers were drawn to the coastal regions where the climate was more temperate, the land was more fertile, and the sea provided a lifeline for trade and supplies. The interior, with its vast deserts and hostile conditions, was deemed too difficult to tame. This initial pattern of settlement has left a lasting legacy, with most Australians still living along the coast, far from the harsh realities of the outback. But long before the Europeans arrived, Australia's indigenous people had already mastered the art of survival in this harsh land. Did you know that these First Nations peoples have lived on this continent for over 60,000 years? They developed unique ways to live in harmony with the land, moving with the seasons to follow food and water sources. Their populations were small and nomadic, meaning they rarely formed large, permanent settlements. This way of life kept much of the continent sparsely populated, even in ancient times. Building infrastructure in such a vast, empty land is another challenge. Did you know that constructing roads, railways, and utilities across the outback is incredibly difficult and costly? The remote and rugged terrain makes it almost impossible to build the infrastructure needed to support large populations. The costs of connecting these isolated areas to the rest of the country are so high that it often isn't worth the effort, leading to further isolation and emptiness. And even when people do venture into the interior, it's often only for a short time. Did you know that Australia is rich in minerals and mining operations have sprung up in some of the most remote parts of the country? These mines can attract thousands of workers, but the towns they build around them are often temporary. When the resources run out, the towns are abandoned, leaving behind ghost towns scattered across the outback. This boom and bust cycle means that even when people do live in the interior, their presence is often fleeting. Australia's unique wildlife and ecosystems also play a role in this emptiness. Did you know that the country's flora and fauna are some of the most unusual and specialized in the world? The interior is home to ecosystems that have adapted to survive in extreme conditions, but these environments are often fragile and difficult for humans to live in. They need to protect these ecosystems from overdevelopment further limits, where people can live, adding to the emptiness of the interior. Natural disasters are another reason why so few people live in the heart of Australia. Did you know that the country is regularly battered by extreme weather events? Bushfires, cyclones, and droughts are all common occurrences, particularly in the interior. These natural disasters can be devastating, destroying homes, crops, and entire communities. The constant threat of such events makes these areas less appealing for settlement, driving people to the safer, more stable coastal regions. But it's not just the land and the weather that keep people away. Did you know that Australians have a deep cultural preference for coastal living? The coast offers access to beautiful beaches, a milder climate, and a more relaxed lifestyle. The idea of living in the harsh, remote interior simply doesn't appeal to most people. This cultural preference has shaped where Australians choose to live, with the vast majority opting for the coast and leaving the interior largely empty. Living in the interior can also be incredibly isolating. Did you know that the vast distances between towns and the outback mean that people often feel cut off from the rest of the world? Access to services like healthcare, education, and entertainment is limited, making life in these areas challenging. The isolation can be both physically and emotionally taxing, deterring people from settling in these remote regions. Government policies have also played a part in shaping Australia's population distribution. Did you know that in the early days of settlement, the government focused on developing the coastal regions? It was easier to build infrastructure and establish economic activities in these areas, and this focus on the coast has continued over the years. Less attention and fewer resources have been allocated to developing the interior, reinforcing the pattern of coastal living and leaving the heart of the country empty. The economy is another critical factor. Did you know that Australia's economy is heavily concentrated in sectors like finance, tourism, and manufacturing, which are mostly based in the cities? These industries thrive in urban environments, particularly along the coast, where they have access to large populations and global markets. The interior, with its limited economic opportunities, doesn't offer the same prospects for work and prosperity, further contributing to its emptiness. Transportation is yet another challenge. Did you know that getting around Australia's interior can be incredibly difficult? The vast distances and rough terrain make travel slow and arduous. Even today, many areas are only accessible by plane or long, difficult drives. This lack of easy transportation options deters people from moving to or staying in these remote regions, adding to the emptiness. Finally, did you know that Australia's emptiness is also a result of conscious choice? The country's people and government have made deliberate decisions to preserve much of the interior as wilderness. National parks, reserves, and protected areas cover large portions of the country, ensuring that these wild landscapes remain untouched by development. This commitment to conservation helps to maintain Australia's natural beauty and biodiversity, but it also means that large areas are intentionally left empty of human habitation.